Okay, now it's actually kind of remarkable because you did not actually live through that as a teenager
No,
in
no.
that through that era.
I lived through it as a someone when the Beatles broke up. I was 11, 12.
So you got kind of like the last wave of it on a first person
Yeah, well,
basis.
no, actually, I mean, I have particular memories from '63 onwards
Okay.
of the Beatles. I was an infant Beatles fan.
An infant Beatles
I
fan.
was. I mean, that is a key part of the Beatles' enduring popularity, which was that right away they appealed to people of all ages.
Right.
And although it's cool to think in rock and roll terms, yeah, you don't really want to be liked by grannies. And I understand their mentality, of course. The fact is that everything that made the Beatles special was of broad appeal. They were principally loved by teenagers, but you didn't have to be a teenager to love them. Because what did they have? They had good looks. Well, you don't stop liking good looks when you turn 20. They were funny. They were charismatic. They were energetic. They wrote engaging music with tremendously good melodies. Well, melody is the province of everyone. It's
Right.
not just the province of teenagers. So there was nothing really to put people off. Eventually, come 66, 7, when the Beatles began to adapt themselves, if you like, or just matured, literally by growing older and being more, I don't want to say tuned in because they were always tuned in guys, but they just kind of grew into themselves, if you like, just developed as adults.
Creative evolution.
Yeah, a creative evolution, but also in terms of their own personal growth. Then they were more prepared, if you like, to. Well, it wasn't so much they were more prepared to do things that pissed older people off, but they were just pissing more people off quite naturally. They had always been themselves. I maintain the Beatles were always themselves, but the the themselves they were being in 63, 4, 5 was quite acceptable to most people. When they were being themselves in 66, 7, 8, 9, that turned some people off.
Right.
They didn't mind that at all.
Right.
They were quite prepared to just be themselves, and if people went off them, fine.
Tough.
Okay, tough. It was just part of the evolution of their personalities, if you like. But undoubtedly,
don't need that kind of fan anyway.
but even at the end, I mean, you look at the Let It Be film when they're up on the roof and they interview people in the street, and they interview a guy in an old hat, an old man in a hat, saying, they're out there, the Beatles are out there, they've got a style of their own,
Yep,
which was
yep.
a very astute remark, by the way. They did always have a style of their own. Yeah, they're the best. Everybody recognised they were the best, and you didn't have to be young to recognise that. And in my own case, as a very young child, I knew it. I knew it because they made me feel better than anything else made me feel. They made me feel happy, they made me feel alive, they made me feel full of joy.
And this is way before you came to appreciate the musicianship, the
Sure.
production, the presentation,
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah, I think our respective entry levels of how we first tune into the Beatles is unique to us. I mean, each individual will tune in a different way.
Right.
For me, it was I love their look, I love their sound, I love their long hair, which I used to have. I used to have a Beatle haircut. And I joined the fan club when I was 8 with my own money. And the first album I ever got was Sgt. Pepper.
Very good.
When I was 9. And it changed my life.
Was it the mono or the stereo?
Mono.
Very good.
We only had a mono record player.
You still have it?
I did do, but I sold all my original records in the late 70s because I got new ones.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
mad
okay.
moment.
Yeah.
Some mad moment. But I do still have my original singles.
Good.
Yeah. And I was principally a singles buyer because I was young, and that was how far my money would stretch in those days. So,
yeah, I still have my She Loves You single on Swan.
Oh, really? Bought when? 64?
Late 63.
Late 63.
Early 64. It was like right at the tail end.
Yeah. The Swan Records thing fascinates me, and I shall be writing quite a bit about Swan. Swan is more than a footnote in my next book.
That's good to know, because I've always been curious about that, and how that came to be, and then
I know how it came to be and how it ceased to be as well.
yes.
And it's an interesting story.
Can you give us a short version now?
Only what you would know. I mean, what I will add is some nice detail to just kind of flesh it out. But yeah, well, the Beatles were rejected by Capitol for Love Me Do, and Please Please Me, and She Loves You.
And From Me to You too.
No, From Me to You they were never offered because VJ had it as a result of getting Please Please Me.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Capitol rejected the Beatles 3 times, and after VJ's contract was terminated, which is an amazingly good story, they were picked up by Swan, which was a little label in Philadelphia, which had Freddie Cannon as the main artist.
Right.
And then Swan had an option on the next record, which would be I Want to Hold Your Hand, and they were persuaded to relinquish their option so that Capitol could finally take them.
Wow. That was a big mess up on Swan's part. If they did they have the power to tell Capitol, no, we're gonna release it?
Yes.
Well, how did they get their arm twisted out of that one?
Business relationship. It came down to a one-on-one business relationship between a representative of EMI and a representative of Swan.
Wow. So, once again, just one little, occurrence.
One phone call with a letter
One
to follow
phone
up.
call, it just could have changed. It could have gone a completely different way.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Yeah. Capitol were incredibly lucky to have the Beatles.
Wow.
And yet by February '64, it's Capitol Records, home of the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
And they'd rejected them 3 times.
Well, April '64.
And really only signed them because of the gimmick of Beatlemania. They didn't like the music.
Right.
There was no one at Capitol. Maybe one person at Capitol I now discover was supporting them, but no.
Well, when I worked at Capitol in the late '70s, one of the joys that I had was going through all of the press archives, and I found internal memos from the marketing and sales people to the field promotion people.
Right.
And this was late '63, and it had to do with I Want to Hold Your Hand, and it had to do with Beatle wigs, and you must wear these Beatle wigs, and we know this is absurd and crazy, and it's just a fad, and it's just going to be over in a minute, but, just roll with it, okay?
Yeah.
And their whole attitude was...
they were a haircut. The Beatles were a haircut.
It
That's
was
why
a haircut, it was a flash in the pan.
they commissioned Gene Shakov, if that's the correct pronunciation, to do a Beatle hairstyle, which was...
Gene Schickel, I think.
Shakove, Shakov.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The guy who was the basis for the film Shampoo.
Okay, right. Okay.
With Warren Beatty.
Right.
Was paid by Capitol Records to create a Beatle hairstyle, which was fed out to the fashion magazines. They were launching the Beatles on the back of a hairstyle.
Right. It was all fashion, lifestyle, pop culture. They couldn't deal with the music.
What they didn't realise was that I Want to Hold Your Hand was a track that just blew everyone away. And in fact, it became something like the genie out of the bottle when the record started being played by Carol James on WWDC in Washington,
right,
playing a copy that was brought over by an air hostess.
His
flying
stewardess
BOAC.
girlfriend.
Yeah. Capitol were trying to stop it. I've actually now seen some documents in which they're trying to prevent the airplay.
Right.
But the beauty of the Beatles' music was that once people heard it, they couldn't get enough of it.
No, you couldn't stick that genie back in the bottle.
No, and so it became this massive hit kind of before Capitol were ready. And I now have as a result of research, kind of day by day pressing plant figures for I Want to Hold Your Hand for the first 2-3 weeks of its life in America from the end of December '63, and they are mind blowing.
I mean, how could they even keep up with it?
They couldn't. They had to farm it out to other pressing plants.
Yeah, because Capitol had, what, 3 or 4 of its own plants?
2 at that point, I think.
Okay, there was one in Scranton, and then one
Scranton,
here.
Pennsylvania, one in LA, and there was eventually a third one in Jacksonville, Illinois.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were like maxed out. They had to job it out to other duplicators.
Went out to RCA Victor and I think to Columbia. I'm not quite sure. I do have it all written down as fact. Stunning figures for how many records it was selling, how many records they were selling, and how they were caught by surprise. But that's part of the beauty of the Beatles story.
Right.
Is that despite Capitol's clumsy attempts to launch them, it very quickly became about the music.
Right.
It really did, because the music was so brilliant.
Capitol just was so lucky in so many ways that...
well, not many corporations get a fourth bite of a cherry.
I was going to say, yeah, because they'd blown the first 3 opportunities, and they scored on the fourth one.
Yeah, and scored bigger than they could have ever realized in a way that they hadn't anticipated.
We just celebrated the anniversary of the domination of the first 5 positions on the Billboard charts.
Yeah.
And it was there was one on Tolly, there was one on Swan.
Yeah.
It was all of the different labels,
VJ,
and 2 Capitals, a Swan, a Tolly, and a VJ.
Yeah, Tolly was really VJ anyway. But yeah, so essentially 2 VJ, 2 Capitol, and 1 Swan.
And then shortly thereafter, Capitol hoovered up the rights to all of these and re-released them on the early Beatles collection.
Yes.
Quite a story.
Yeah, the Beatles story on Capitol Records is, well, it's already been written by Bruce Spicer in a very thorough and entertaining way.
Yes.
But I intend to tell it a bit differently from Bruce, but undoubtedly the material is there. However you slice it, it's a great story. Yeah.
I have to ask you, you said earlier that you wanted to get into the Capitol vaults. What is it that you want to look for? What is it, aside from Beatles tapes and so forth? What would you be looking for? What would float your...
Paperwork.
Just more paperwork.
Paperwork. I constantly am looking for paperwork. Pieces of paper that tell you what happened in that day, in that moment. Letters, business documents, primarily business documents. And within companies and corporations, the inter-office memos.
Yes.
Staff talking to staff. In those days, it was pre-email, and though everyone had a phone, important things would always be conveyed in printed form, typed by a secretary.
Right.
In
an inter-office envelope.
Yeah.
With the
with
the tie thing
for reuse. BBC inter-office memos, EMI inter-office memos, Capitol, Waterhofer's office in New York, NEMS Enterprises, of course, in England, Brian Epstein's company. I have a lot of this stuff. I don't have it all, but I scour the world for anything I haven't seen already. And it's worth saying again, I think, that I am continually looking out for material. So if anyone watching this has anything that they think is special to their collection that nobody else has, and that therefore I might not have seen, I would really welcome the opportunity to have a scan or a photocopy or a photograph, whatever it is. I don't need to own the original piece of paper. I'm not after depriving anyone of their original artifacts. I just want to learn from it.
You just want the information.
Yeah, I want to learn from it so that I can feed it into these history books.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, so that it can illuminate even further the story that is already so extraordinary. Yeah.
Fantastic, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, if you'd be so kind. And,
I will. Now, my name only, or your name and my name?
Your name only would be good. Beautiful. Over and out, mate. One more time.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
The best way to reach me is via my website, which is marklewisohn.net.
Okay.
It's a fairly crappy website, so don't spend too long looking at it because there isn't much on it. I don't have time to maintain it.
Well, it's just an online calling card.
Yeah.
That's all you need, basically.
And I would welcome the opportunity to actually improve it in some way. But for the moment, it's not very good, but I can be reached through it. So www.marklewisohn.net.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Good.
I urge everyone to visit, tune in, and get ready for the next volume.